Hi guys, today we'll be taking a look at some of the different string functions that are available to you when working with strings in C#. So let's take a look. Let's open Visual Studio, create new project. It's our favorite friend here again, the console app, .NET Framework C#. And we'll call this one Working with Strings. So we've used strings more than anything else in this series so far, and that's because we've been capturing strings from the user in the console. We've been writing messages to the user in the console, which is a string. We've added strings together so that we can add values that we've calculated to strings that we want in the console. We've converted strings into numbers, and then we've converted numbers back into strings again. So strings are a massive part of any kind of program, really. But there is a few very nifty functions on the string object that you can use to make your life much easier. So in the last video, we made an app where you could search through a list of names. What you might not have realized is that search was actually case sensitive because strings have upper and lowercase characters. And when you're filtering your arrays based on user input, you want to try and get rid of that case sensitivity. So there's some functions that we can look at today which will help you navigate that. So today we will make an app which asks the user for a string. It converts their string to uppercase. It will convert the string to lowercase. We will trim it, which is to remove white space from the start and end. We will use a function called contains to check the content of the string. And we will look at how you can join an array of strings together into a string. So we will join an array of strings together. And then finally, we will stop our program from closing. So let's look how you might do that. So obviously we know how to capture user input now. So we'll just ask the user for a number, console.WriteLine, and say, please enter some text and hit return. Crikey, all the typos. And then we will capture their input. So we'll say var input equals console.readline. So we've got our user input. So now we know that console.readline, it returns a string. So we've got our string here from the user, and now we can start manipulating that string. So we do that with some string functions, which you can find like this. So you can say input dot to upper, and that will return a copy of the string converted to uppercase. So let's do that, and actually let's just output this in the console. So we'll say console.WriteLine, and we will close that. And actually, just so it's a bit clearer, we'll put a little string at the beginning and say this is the uppercase version. So essentially all we've done there is we've taken our input from the user and we've put it back into the console, but we've ran it through this function called toUpper, which makes a copy of it and makes it uppercase. So that's our uppercase. Let's look at our lowercase, which is very similar. You just console.WriteLine, and we want to tell the user this is the lower case, and we will, instead of using the upper, we'll use the toLower function, and it's exactly the same. Returns a copy of the string converted to lowercase, so we'll be passing that to the user. Now, White space in strings can be quite annoying. So sometimes when you ask a user for a value, they might be pasting a value in from somewhere else, or they may accidentally add a space. What you end up with is a string which might look like this if we were to add one. You know, you might have some white space at the beginning and some white space at the end, which isn't necessarily what you want. You might be wanting to put this in a box, or it might be a password, and you know, a password with an extra space at the beginning will be not the password that the user thinks. So what we have available to help us fix this is 3 functions to do with trimming. So let's just console.Readline, and we will do a general trim, which will just be our input, and then we'll use this trim command, trim function. Crikey, I can't talk today. So, and this removes all leading and trailing whitespace characters from the current string object. So that's just a general trim. That's mainly the only one that I use, but if you do get into a scenario where you only want to trim the end, we can do that too. So there's one called trim end, and that will just take any white space off the end of a string, and if there's some on the front, it will leave that there. And you've probably guessed that there is also one called trim start, and we'll do trim start. And again, just have a quick hover over that. We can see removes all leading occurrences of sets of characters specified in an array. So actually that's the wrong help. It's giving me the wrong overload. Okay, so that is a bit misleading. We can actually put nothing in here. I suppose technically it's an overload, but it's not going to show you that here. So just ignore this box completely, because I can understand why that would be confusing. But essentially it does the same thing. It just takes the white space off of the end, off of the start, in the same way like this one takes it off of the end. And so that will clean up your string if you need to support that for, you know, making sure that all your data is nice and neat and tidy, and as you expect, even when users are copying and pasting from other applications. So the next thing we're going to look at is to check the content of a string. So this comes into our, where we've looked at conditional logic before. So we could say if input contains, and we might ask if the input contains like the number 1. If it does, this block of code will be triggered, just like with all of the other if statements. Now, one thing I'm doing differently here, which you might have noticed, is I haven't got equals true, because actually you don't need that. This value is a type of bool or boolean, and a boolean is just a true or a false value. So this will return true or it will return false, and we don't need to check if it's equal to true or false, because we're just checking, you know, what the actual result is, which will be true or false. We can if we put the equals true, all we're really saying is if true equals true or if false equals true. So you don't need to put this in. Sometimes it's nice to just have that in there so that you can see, oh, actually we're checking if something's true when you're reading through it quickly. But for today, I will be leaving that out, and we will pop a message to the user to say user input did contain 1, and we will just add an else on the end here, and we will copy and paste this, and we will just change it and put user input did not contain 1. So we can see what the result of that was when we do our tests at the end. So that's contains, but there is actually 2 other ones which are very useful. We could also see if input starts with, and what starts with does is it's like contains, but instead of checking the entire string, it just checks the string at the beginning to see, so it checks the input that you put in to see if the string starts with that particular string that you've passed through. So all strings. So if we put in here, if it starts with J, and we'll run our block of code here. So I'll just copy and paste one of these ones from above and modify it. And we'll say user input did start with J. And you've probably guessed it, but there is another function called ends with. And ends with is exactly what you would expect. It just checks to see if the string is found at the end of the string that you're checking. So we'll say in here, did end with S, and this will only trigger if it ends with S, just like this one will only trigger if it begins with J. So that's how we can check the contents of our string, whether they start with something, whether they end with something, or whether they contain something. What we've looked at in previous videos is arrays or lists of string. So let's make an array. Let's make a list of strings. So we'll say var list string equals new list string. And we'll put some values in there. So we'll say, just do something simple like A, B, C. So we've got our array of strings and they contain A, B, and C. But what we might want to do is show that to the user. And we've done that before. We've looped through and we've shown those to the user. But there is also a function in the string object called join. And what you can do with join is you can connect a set of strings together and you can actually put a separator in as well. So what we might do is have comma be the separator, and we will then pass in our list string as the second argument. And actually this is something we've not looked at so far. So join actually takes two arguments. The first one is a string separator and the second one is an enumerable of string. We'll just complete that line and we'll actually obviously need to assign it. So we'll say var joined up string equals string.join, and then we'll just join those all up and it will actually put a comma in between them all. So if you've ever looked at a CSV spreadsheet, that's essentially a bunch of values separated by commas. And then when you open that up in Excel, for example, it knows which column to put in which box. And then finally, we need to stop our app from closing. So we'll do our trusty trick of console.readline. And we're ready to test. So let's see how that goes. So please enter some text and hit return. I'm going to enter my name. And you'll see here, my name in uppercase was James in caps. In lowercase, which is actually how I put it in, is lowercase James. I didn't put any white space in, and we'll do that in a sec. So we can ignore those trim ones. And then user input did not contain 1. User input did start with J, and user input did end with S. So all of those functions are working as expected. Let's try a different test. So let's put in loads of spaces and some numbers, and loads of spaces and some numbers and some spaces. So let's just assume the user has copy and pasted that from somewhere else, and we'll hit return. So uppercase has no effect on it because it's all numbers. Same with lowercase. What you can see here is when we've done the general trim, it's taken the white space from the beginning. It will have also taken the white space from the end, but you won't be able to see that. When we do trim end, it's not super visible that that's happened, but it will have trimmed the white space on the end. But when we do trim start, you can see it's pulled all of the white space out, just like the general trim did. And then the user input did contain 1, so we got that output. And for the J and the E, we didn't put an else, so we don't expect anything to show up there. And actually, what we haven't seen so far is our joined up string, because I forgot to output it. So let's just do console.writeline, and we'll say this is our joined up string. And we'll add that on there, joined up string. We'll run one more time. Just enter 1, 2, 3. You see here, our joined up string is A, B, and C, just like what we had in our original declaration for our list. Hi guys, well done for making it to the end of the video. Just a quick heads up that there is a link to the project files from today's session in the video description. If you have any questions about anything we've covered today, feel free to leave me a comment. And as always, I will see you in the next one.